Hi everyone, and welcome back to Retro Legends. There was a moment in the 1990s when two-dimensional graphics reached such perfection that they seemed alive. A moment when pixels were not just bright dots on a screen, but tiny tiles in a moving mosaic, capable of evoking emotion, dynamism, and personality. That moment had a name: Neo Geo. While the world was getting ready to embrace the revolution of 3D, with rough polygons and grainy textures promising the future, SNK chose to perfect the art of the present. And so, in 1990, a machine was born that didn't just want to amaze, it wanted to leave a mark on history. This is the story of Neo Geo's pixel art, of how an aesthetic vision became a language, and how, for a moment, two-dimensional could be more powerful, more evocative, more real than three-dimensional itself. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Let's begin. By the late 80s, SNK was a company searching for its identity. Founded in Osaka in 1978 as Shin Nihon Kikaku, New Japan Project, the company had released several moderately successful arcade titles, such as Ikari Warriors, Athena, and Guerrilla War, but it still lacked that stroke of genius capable of securing it a stable place among the industry giants. The market in those years was dominated by giants like Capcom, with its increasingly refined fighting and action games, Sega, queen of the arcades thanks to its cutting-edge hardware, and Namco, which continued to innovate with new genres and technologies. For a company like SNK, the risk was to remain trapped in a secondary position, relegated to producing well-made titles but without a clear identity. It was in this scenario that a bold idea was born. SNK realized that the future of video game entertainment lay in the convergence of two then distinct worlds, that of arcades and that of home consoles. In the late 80s, home platforms like the NES or Mega Drive offered fun experiences, but they were technically inferior to arcades. The magic of arcades, bright screens, powerful sound, huge sprites, and immediate gameplay, was still something that couldn't be replicated in the living room. SNK wanted to change all this. The goal was as simple as it was revolutionary: to create a universal platform where the code was identical between the arcade version and the home version. No conversion, no loss of quality, no compromises. What you saw in the arcade was exactly what you would play at home. A visionary idea for the time, but also extremely risky, both technically and economically. The project took shape in 1990, and from it two twin systems were born: the Neo Geo MVS, multi-video system, and the AES, Advanced Entertainment System. The first was intended for arcades, with a major logistical innovation. A single cabinet could host multiple games simultaneously thanks to an interchangeable cartridge system. Arcade operators could thus easily change titles without replacing the entire machine, saving space and money. It was a brilliant idea that would guarantee the Neo Geo a long commercial life. But SNK's real gamble was the AES, the home version of the system. For the first time in history, a player could bring the exact arcade experience home without compromises. The hardware was identical to that of arcade machines, and the cartridges were also physically enormous because they contained very powerful memory chips for the time. However, this fidelity came at a price. The AES cost astronomical sums. At launch in 1990, the price was around $650, but the cartridges, true luxury games, could cost $200 or $300 each. It was a console designed for a select few. But that small audience, made up of enthusiasts and collectors, soon became the beating heart of the Neo Geo legend. For them, the AES wasn't just a console. It was a symbol of prestige, of gaming purity, of absolute fidelity to the arcade experience. SNK wasn't trying to compete with Sega or Nintendo on their own turf. It was creating a market of its own, exclusive, almost elitist. The impact of the Neo Geo was enormous from a cultural standpoint as well. The minimalist and angular design, the unmistakable golden logo, the authentic arcade joysticks included in the package. Everything communicated a clear message. This is not a toy, it's a machine for serious gamers. It was the perfect embodiment of the motto, the 100 Mega Shock, which adorned covers and advertisements, indicating a graphical and sound power never seen before. SNK's gamble paid off. The Neo Geo brand became synonymous with arcade excellence, an evocative name capable of conveying an aura of exclusivity and power. And even though AES sales remained limited, the MVS system conquered arcades around the world. Titles like Fatal Fury, Samurai Shodown, Art of Fighting, and Metal Slug made history, defining the visual and technical style that still makes SNK a legend in retro gaming today. In hindsight, SNK's vision was prophetic. In an era when consoles and arcades seemed like separate worlds, the Japanese company was the first to grasp the path of technological unification, an idea that, years later, would become the norm with increasingly similar hardware between arcade cabinets and home consoles. The Neo Geo was not just a machine, it was a manifesto, the purest expression of SNK's philosophy, that of no compromise gaming, where quality and passion came first. Neo Geo's pixel art wasn't just a matter of hardware power or technical skill. It was, first and foremost, a declaration of intent, an artistic manifesto. In a period when the entire industry was enthusiastically moving towards 3D, SNK consciously decided to take the opposite path. While others pursued perspective depth and polygonal modeling, SNK refined its two-dimensional art until it transformed into something unique, immediately recognizable, almost organic. Every game developed for Neo Geo possessed an aesthetic coherence that went beyond simple graphic style. It was a visual identity, a signature. The saturated and vibrant colors, the crisp yet never angular lines, the animations that moved with an almost natural fluidity, everything contributed to creating a visual language that belonged only to SNK. There was a precise balance between realism and stylization, between cartoonish exaggeration and attention to detail. The sprites weren't just drawings moving on the screen. They were true characters, endowed with a soul. The secret lay in the meticulous care with which every single frame was created. SNK artists worked like true traditional animators. Every movement was hand-drawn, frame after frame, without shortcuts. It wasn't just about making a punch or a jump credible, but about conveying personality through movement. The way a character breathed, the way they placed their feet on the ground or darted forward, everything was calibrated to express emotion and character. In titles like The King of Fighters, Samurai Shodown, or Metal Slug, this philosophy reached its peak. The soft shading, achieved through a skillful use of limited palettes, gave three-dimensionality to the figures while remaining in the realm of two dimensions. The reflections on weapons, the play of light on fabrics, the folds of a jacket or the tension of a muscle were rendered with surprising painterly sensitivity. It wasn't just about showing graphical power, but about evoking sensations, warmth, energy, impact. Another aspect that distinguished SNK pixel art was the dynamic of color. Artists created custom color tables for each game, often even for each individual character, studying how the hues reacted to different backgrounds or particular visual effects. Skin had warmer tones, shadows faded into pinkish or purplish hues, metallic reflections used unnatural but vibrant shades like turquoise or magenta. It was an almost artisanal art form, where technology became a tool at the service of human sensibility. This attention to detail also translated into environmental animations. In levels like Metal Slug, for example, pixel art became a living organism. Flags waving, birds crossing the screen, smoke slowly dissipating into the air. Every element contributed to building a coherent, pulsating world where even the smallest visual detail told a story. It was a way of conceiving video games not just as entertainment, but as a moving visual work. While the rest of the industry focused on the illusion of three-dimensionality to impress, SNK demonstrated that two-dimensionality, when treated with intelligence and passion, could be more alive than three-dimensionality itself. The polygonal productions of those years often appear crude and dated today. On the contrary, SNK's pixel art has remained intact over time. Its animations, its colors, and its lines are still today an example of balance and beauty. There was something deeply human in the way SNK designed its worlds. It was an analog approach in an era that was becoming increasingly digital. Every pixel was placed with a precise intention. Every color had an emotional weight. Every movement was designed to be felt, not just seen. SNK games didn't try to imitate reality, but to interpret it, and in doing so, they created a new reality, made of rhythm, energy, and style. This is perhaps the greatest visual legacy of the Neo Geo. Having transformed pixel art from a simple technique into an expressive language. A language that even today, decades later, continues to inspire artists, developers, and enthusiasts worldwide. The first true masterpieces of Neo Geo pixel art were born precisely in the genre that, more than any other, would define the console's identity: fighting games. It was a fiercely competitive arena, dominated by Capcom and its Street Fighter II, but SNK chose a completely different path. More theatrical, more sensual, more human. If Capcom focused on readability and mechanics, SNK focused on visual dramaturgy. Every fight had to be a scene, every stage a theatrical set. With Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting, SNK demonstrated that 2D could not only be spectacular, but also emotionally resonant. The backgrounds were true moving paintings, the cheering crowd, flags waving in the wind, smoke rising from burning grates, neon lights reflecting in puddles. There was a meticulous attention to the life unfolding in the background, a desire to make every encounter part of a coherent and vibrant world. Every stage told a story. There were no dialogues, but there was the scenography. Just looking at the port of Southtown, with cranes moving in the background, or the illuminated ring of Art of Fighting with the delirious crowd, was enough to understand who these characters were and where they came from. Each fighter was a visual microcosm, a concentrate of identity and charisma, the fiery spirit of Terry Bogard, the elegant composure of Ryo Sakazaki, the dark aura of Geese Howard. SNK wasn't just seeking spectacle, it was seeking style. The distinctive trait of their artists was the ability to make pixels sensual, vibrant, full of tension. Muscles were sculpted with soft shading, fabrics moved realistically, facial expressions conveyed anger, pain, or determination. In an era when polygons were just starting to appear, SNK built an aesthetic language based on the warmth of drawing and meticulous attention to animation. Then came Samurai Shodown, and with it, Neo Geo's pixel art reached an almost poetic level. Far from the skyscrapers of Southtown, the game brought battles to a stylized feudal Japan, made of temples, forests, lakes, and endless skies. Violence gave way to rhythm, tension, and contemplation. Blows were not just actions, but events. Every lunge, every cut, every sword trail was accompanied by a visual and sound choreography meticulously crafted. The luminous trails of blades, the sparks exploding on contact, the snow falling silently during the most dramatic duels. Samurai Shodown was more than a fighting game. It was a poem in pixels. Every visual element had a meaning, a timing, a weight. When Haomaru's blade struck the void and the wind swayed the cherry blossoms in the background, a kind of digital spirituality was perceived, a calm that only a few games of that era managed to evoke. The rhythm of the fights also contributed to that sense of immersion. It wasn't frantic like Street Fighter, but strategic, punctuated by pauses and silences. Every animation was designed to convey the sense of time, the preparation, the weight, the sudden burst of energy. All of this was realized with artisanal precision, frame after frame, without the aid of automated technologies or three-dimensional calculations. It was pixel art with a soul, with a philosophy, and with a rhythm. Every pixel breathed, every movement had an intention. In a period when realism was the buzzword, SNK chose instead to pursue essence. Their games didn't try to reproduce the world, but to evoke it. And this made them immortal. All of this, the shadows stretching across battlefields, the lights changing color with the sunset, the reflections of a sword glinting in the moonlight, was possible on a platform that, on paper, was still only two-dimensional. But that two-dimensionality, in the hands of SNK, became three-dimensional not by the number of polygons, but by emotional depth. It was art built pixel by pixel, like a digital mosaic that managed to convey pathos, movement, and life. If there's one title that embodies the absolute pinnacle of pixel art on the Neo Geo, well, that title is undoubtedly Metal Slug. Born in 1996 from the brilliant minds of Nazca Corporation, a small group of former IREM developers, the same ones who had worked on Gun Force and In the Hunt, Metal Slug represents the perfect encounter between technical mastery and artistic freedom. When SNK decided to acquire Nazca shortly after the first installment, they realized they had not only a new franchise on their hands, but a manifesto of two-dimensional video game art. In a period when the industry was already looking to 3D as the inevitable future, Metal Slug was an act of aesthetic resistance. It didn't try to be realistic, but expressive. It didn't aim for simulation, but for stylization. Every frame, every sprite, every explosion told a story. Animation wasn't a medium, but a language. The characters in Metal Slug are alive in a way that few games can match even today. The developers drew and animated thousands of frames by hand, building a world where even the enemies had personality. The regular army soldiers scratch their heads, stumble, surrender, tremble before dying. Liberated prisoners jump for joy, throwing weapons and laughter. The animations don't just serve to make the movement believable. They serve to humanize, to create empathy, to tell a story. Every gesture, however small, is designed to convey character. The bosses, then, are pure spectacle. Colossal war machines drawn with maniacal precision, exploding in sequences of smoke and fire, recreated pixel by pixel. Every explosion is a moving painting, layers of flames, flying shrapnel, clouds slowly dissolving in the air. Everything is done by hand, without shortcuts, with a sense of visual rhythm that today we would call cinematic, but which then was the result of pure artistic intuition. And then there are the details, that dimension where Metal Slug truly becomes unique. The reflections of water rippling as a bullet passes, the flashes of lightning illuminating the battlefield during a thunderstorm, the metal gleaming for an instant before exploding. Nothing is left to chance. Even the way weapons bounce on the ground or bullets deform surfaces shows an almost obsessive care for the craft of the pixel. But the real secret of Metal Slug is not just its technique, it's its spirit. Unlike other run-and-guns of the era like Contra or Gun Force, Metal Slug never takes war seriously. It transforms it into a surreal parody, a comedic theater of destruction and irony. It's a game that laughs at itself, alternating the drama of action with a taste for the absurd. Seeing an enemy soldier run away screaming or an alien hugging a liberated prisoner is part of its magic. Metal Slug doesn't just ask you to play, but to observe, to laugh, to be amazed. This irony is not an accident. The Nazca developers wanted to create a game that was animated in the most literal sense of the term, full of life. The inspiration came as much from classic Japanese animation as from Western cartoons, particularly those of Tex Avery and Warner Brothers, with their sense of visual exaggeration and comedic timing. This is why Metal Slug manages to be violent and light at the same time. Because every explosion is a ballet, every death an explosion of creativity. On a technical level, the work was titanic. The team used a graphic layering system to superimpose multiple levels of animation, creating depth and movement even in completely two-dimensional scenarios. The color palettes were calibrated with extreme precision. No pixel was wasted, no nuance was accidental. The result was pixel art that didn't just seem drawn, but sculpted. Perfect in readability, yet rich in texture and vibration. Finally, fluidity was its most recognizable trait. Every movement of Marco Rossi or Tarma Roving was composed of dozens of frames, each slightly different, with a naturalness that recalled traditional animation. When Marco reloads his gun or throws a grenade, you can feel the weight, the effort, the human gesture. This is what makes Metal Slug so alive, the physicality of the drawing. Yet the greatness of Metal Slug is measured not only in its pixels, but in its message. It is a game that represents the definitive victory of two-dimensional over the illusion of three-dimensional. At a time when the whole world was looking towards the new polygonal dimension, Nazca and SNK demonstrated that true art doesn't need to resemble reality to excite. It just needs to know it, interpret it, reinvent it. Metal Slug is, in a sense, the last great cry of pixel art before the world changed. It is the swan song of classic two-dimensional, but also proof that that art form never truly died. Even today, those who play it remain mesmerized by that perfect combination of humor, rhythm, aesthetics, and craftsmanship. Behind those pixels, behind every line drawn on the screen, lay a very precise philosophy. SNK wasn't aiming for realism in the technical sense of the word. It didn't want to imitate reality, but rather something more subtle and lasting: expressiveness. The goal wasn't to show what a movement looks like, but how it feels. SNK artists worked like traditional animators. Before drawing a single sprite, they created complete storyboards, preparatory sketches, color studies, and even movement simulations on graph paper. The process was long, meticulous, almost obsessive, but it was also a labor of love. Each frame was treated as a micro-illustration, an animation cell worthy of a Miyazaki or Otomo film. It's no coincidence that many members of SNK's graphic teams came directly from the world of Japanese animation, a fundamental detail. These artists brought a different, more cinematic and theatrical sensibility to video games. They were accustomed to thinking in terms of body acting, the weight of a gesture, and visual rhythm. When Terry Bogard adjusts his cap before a fight, or when Mai Shiranui fans herself, it's not just decoration, it's acting. It's character building through movement. SNK was obsessed with this idea. Pixels shouldn't just show, they should express. Every animation, every color, every reaction time served to tell something about the character. Take the King of Fighters. Each fighter had a unique body language, made up of poses, timings, and rhythms that revealed personality and mood. Kyo Kusanagi is impulsive and direct. His animations are quick and angular. Iori Yagami, on the other hand, is more fluid, almost serpentine, but with sudden bursts of rage. Clark and Ralph, the military veterans, have rigid and mechanical movements, while Athena moves like a stage idol. Nothing was accidental. Psychology was conveyed through pixel art. And then there was color. SNK didn't just choose technical palettes, but created true chromatic systems consistent with the narrative world. Artists experimented with warm hues for skin, almost liquid shadows for clothing, and saturated contrasts for artificial lights. Even the shading followed precise rules designed to suggest material, temperature, and depth. It was a form of cinematography done with pixels. A particularly fascinating anecdote concerns Metal Slug 2. Some enemy and boss sprites were drawn larger than necessary, almost double the size, and then scaled down to fit the Neo Geo's resolution. This artistic compression operation allowed for exceptional visual density. Details, curves, and nuances were squeezed into fewer pixels, generating softer shading and richer shapes. In practice, it was a kind of inverse upscaling, done entirely by hand. Today we would call it a form of artistic upscaling, but back then it was just the fruit of ingenuity, experience, and artisanal sensibility. This approach was radically different from that of other companies. While many software houses sought efficiency, more sprites, more frames, less time, SNK sought intensity. Every movement had to have weight, rhythm, and a kind of physical truth. And to achieve that feeling, animators didn't hesitate to sacrifice time, memory, and even performance. But the result spoke for itself. An SNK animation had a recognizable signature at first glance. It was a school of pixel art that treated video games as a performative art. It wasn't enough to draw a warrior, you had to make him live. And this, paradoxically, is what made their games more real than many 3D titles of the era. When, in the mid-90s, 3D became synonymous with progress, the entire video game industry experienced a sudden and almost brutal paradigm shift. The future, everyone said, was made of polygons. PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64 competed for technological supremacy with three-dimensional worlds, map textures, and dynamic cameras. The magazines of the time spoke of the end of the two-dimensional era, and even many historical software houses abandoned pixel art to pursue that new visual frontier. 2D began to be seen as a relic of the past, something old to be quickly overcome. But SNK didn't see it that way. While the world rushed towards the third dimension, the Japanese company decided to remain faithful to its own identity. It continued to perfect what it did best, animating 2D like no one else. The Neo Geo, a machine born in the early 90s, became a kind of artistic refuge, a bastion of traditional beauty in a landscape dominated by novelty. It wasn't resistance dictated by technical backwardness, but a conscious choice of poetics. SNK understood that power isn't everything. The real leap forward isn't technological, but stylistic. So, while the 3D models of the first PlayStation or Saturn games aged visibly, angular with blurry textures and rigid animations, Neo Geo games retained an almost magical freshness. One only had to look at the King of Fighters 98, Last Blade 2, or Garou, Mark of the Wolves. Every frame looked like an illustrated plate. Every character vibrated with life. There was nothing dated in those images because they didn't seek reality, but the interpretation of reality. And art, when it's sincere, never ages. The Neo Geo didn't chase the future, it redefined it in its own way. While other companies changed tools, SNK continued to refine its visual language, achieving a complexity that no 3D engine of the era could replicate. Every new release was a display of strength, ever richer pixels, animated backgrounds with almost painterly depth, plays of light, simulated transparencies, incredibly refined atmospheric effects. It was as if 2D had reached its purest form precisely when the world was abandoning it. The beauty of the Neo Geo also lay in its consistency. In a period of aesthetic transition, where everything changed rapidly, SNK games maintained a recognizable visual line, a precise identity. Anyone who played an SNK title immediately knew they were facing that type of art. And this, for a company, is the highest sign of cultural success. When we talk about the resilience of 2D, a fundamental aspect is often forgotten. Early 3D was experimental, fascinating but imperfect. 2D, on the other hand, had reached complete maturity. The pixel art of the Neo Geo represented the balance point between art and technology, between craftsmanship and calculation. It was no longer just a technical medium, but an autonomous, expressive language with its own rules, aesthetics, and philosophy. And that's why, even today, while many of the 3D pioneers appear stiff and dated, SNK's works continue to be considered splendid. There's a purity in those pixels, a formal clarity that needs no updates or high-definition patches. The characters of Samurai Shodown, Metal Slug, or KOF don't age because they never tried to look real. They always tried to be true. In the end, this is precisely the message the Neo Geo left to the world. Beauty doesn't depend on technology, but on who uses it. Graphics are not just a matter of processing power, but of sensibility, of rhythm, of imagination. Pixels don't age. They only change the way we look at them. And the moment we stop considering them a limitation, they return to being what they always were. Small fragments of art, capable of telling deeper emotions than any three-dimensional model. SNK artists worked under truly unique technical conditions. Color palettes were often extremely limited, sometimes just 16 or 32 colors per character, which forced them into an exercise of creative constraint. They had to carefully choose each shade, balance contrasts, and use clever shading to give depth to figures that, on paper, should have appeared flat. In games like The Last Blade 2, this mastery reached incredibly high levels. Backgrounds were hand-painted, like true digitized paintings, then reduced to 256 color palettes. Despite the compression, they managed to maintain that painterly look that still impresses today with its delicacy and realism. Fogs that fade into temples, leaves dancing slowly in the air, Japanese sunsets painted pixel by pixel. With Metal Slug, the work pushed beyond all limits. Boss animations required months of manual labor. Every single explosion, every destroyed tank piece was composed of dozens of frames drawn one by one. There were no automatisms. Everything was the result of observation, patience, and an enormous passion for detail. The Neo Geo, for its part, was an oversized machine for its time. It could handle up to 380 simultaneous sprites on screen, an impressive number for the early 90s. This allowed for crowded action scenes, rich in effects and movement, with a fluidity that rivaled and often surpassed that of competing arcade halls. But what made the result unique was also the technical ingenuity. Since the system did not natively support transparencies or particle effects, developers invented what is called simulated transparency. By alternating light and dark pixels, they managed to create illusions of smoke, fog, or dynamic shadows, a trick as simple as it was brilliant, which gave life and depth to hardware that, on paper, should not have been able to do it. Today, pixel art is experiencing a second youth. Independent games like Shovel Knight, Blasphemous, Owlboy, and The Messenger look to SNK's aesthetic as a source of inspiration. But there's a difference. While many modern studios recreate pixel art for nostalgia, SNK used it as a primary language, as a contemporary art form. The Neo Geo didn't imitate anything. It was the avant-garde, not the retrospective. And when we talk about art in video games today, we must remember that art, for SNK, was not an abstract concept. It was the result of discipline, of a method, of a passion that transformed technical limitations into visual poetry. To look at a Neo Geo game today means to look at a piece of history, but also a dream still alive. Every sprite is a fragment of an era where technology and art walked together, in perfect balance. Perhaps it's true, 3D won the commercial battle, but Neo Geo's 2D won the battle of time. And deep down, every time we hear the metallic sound of a coin dropping into an arcade cabinet, or we see the Max 330 mega screen again, something inside us lights up. It's the nostalgia of an era where every pixel counted, and where imagination did the rest. Because there was a time when 2D wasn't just better than 3D. It was all we needed to believe that the future had already arrived. And with that, our journey into the past comes to an end. How many of these curiosities did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Thanks for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.